There is one moment I keep coming back to, even now. I'm standing in the middle of a field I've walked 1,000 times, and I realize that the words I spoke 6 months earlier, the most sincere words I had ever spoken in my entire life, were words I could no longer keep. And what scares me most is not what I did, it's what it says about who I was becoming. That moment broke something open in me that I am still learning to understand. I want to tell you this story, all of it, because I think you deserve to hear the truth, and because I spent so long hiding it that the silence started to feel heavier than the secret itself. I grew up in a small Amish community in rural Ohio, and if you've never lived inside that kind of life, let me try to help you feel what it was like. Everything was built on three things: faith, family, and your word. Those weren't just values we memorized, they were the structure of every single day. You woke up before sunrise, you worked, you prayed, you served, and you did all of it without complaint because your community depended on you being exactly who you said you were. A person who kept their promises was a person of worth. A person who broke them was someone the community quietly mourned. My mother used to say that a promise spoken in honesty was a promise witnessed by God, and I believed her. Completely. Without question. I was the oldest of 6 children, and I felt that responsibility in my bones from the time I was very young. I kept my younger siblings in line. I helped my mother with everything: cooking, sewing, preserving, laundry. I was known in our community as dependable, steady, faithful. People trusted me before I had even earned that trust, because I seemed, from the outside, to already know exactly who I was and exactly where I was going. And maybe that was the problem. I looked settled when I was still becoming. When I was 22, I made a promise to a man named Daniel. He was kind, quiet, hardworking, and deeply respected in our community. He had a gentle way about him. He never raised his voice. He was patient with animals and children, and his faith was something you could see in how he lived rather than just how he spoke. There was a lot to admire about Daniel, truly. The promise I made was not just to marry him one day. It was bigger than that. We sat together one evening, with both of our families nearby, and I told him I told everyone that I would build a life here, that I would stay, that the life we were planning together was the life I chose, and that I chose it fully, without reservation. I believed every word I said. I want you to understand that. I was not performing. I was not pretending. In that moment, I meant it with everything I had. But here is the question that kept me up at night, months later. Can you truly promise something about the person you'll be in the future when you haven't yet met all the parts of yourself that are still waiting to surface? I didn't know the answer then. I'm not sure I fully know it even now. The change didn't happen all at once. It never does it? It started slowly, the way a crack spreads through ice. You don't notice it until you're already standing in the wrong place. A few months after Daniel and I made our promise public, my father hired a young man from outside our community to help with a construction project on our property. His name was Owen. He was in his late 20s, calm and thoughtful, and he had a way of listening that I had honestly never experienced before. When I said something, he didn't just wait for his turn to speak. He actually absorbed what I said. He would pause before responding. He would ask follow-up questions. He treated my words as if they mattered. Now I want to be honest with you here, because this is the part that is easiest to misunderstand. What happened between Owen and me was not a romance that swept me off my feet. It was something quieter and, in some ways, more dangerous. It was recognition. He saw me not the role I was playing, not the dependable oldest daughter, not Daniel's future wife, but me, the person underneath all of that. And I hadn't realized until that moment how long I had been waiting to be seen that way. Our conversations happened in fragments: a few minutes here while I was carrying water, 10 minutes there while he was eating lunch near the barn. He asked me once what I loved most about my life, and I remember stopping cold because no one had ever asked me that before. People asked what I was good at, people asked what I was doing. Nobody had ever asked me what I loved. I gave him an answer that day, a safe one. But later that night, lying in bed, I asked myself the same question honestly, and the honest answer frightened me. Because the things that made me feel most alive reading, asking questions that had no easy answers, imagining places I had never been, feeling that there was a version of myself I hadn't yet been allowed to meet, none of those things fit neatly inside the life I had just promised to build. I told myself it was just restlessness. Young women feel restless sometimes. It passes. I convinced myself of that for weeks. Then Daniel started talking about the house. He had chosen a plot of land about a mile from his family's farm, and he wanted to begin building in the spring. He showed me his drawings one afternoon, simple, careful sketches of a home with a wide kitchen and a garden space on the south side. He was so proud of those drawings. His hands were shaking slightly as he held them out to me, and I looked at those sketches, and I smiled, and I said they were beautiful. Because they were, and because saying anything else would have required more courage than I had at that moment. But inside, something shifted. Something that felt like a door closing. I started sleeping badly. I would lie awake listening to the sounds of the house at night, the wind, the animals, my siblings breathing, and I would pray the same prayer over and over. I would ask God to take this feeling away from me, to make me simple again, to restore the certainty I had felt when I made my promise to Daniel, because that certainty had been one of the most peaceful feelings I had ever known, and now it was gone, and I couldn't find it no matter how hard I searched. Owen worked on our property for about 3 months in total. And somewhere in the middle of that time, during a conversation that started as something small, a question about what books I had read, I admitted something to him that I had never said aloud to anyone. I told him that I sometimes felt like I was living the right life for someone else. He didn't react with shock. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply said, "I think that's one of the hardest things a person can feel." And then we sat in silence for a while, and somehow that silence said more than any advice ever could. I knew then that my heart was no longer where my promise was, and that knowing was devastating. I tried to pull back. I told myself to stop having those conversations with Owen. I poured myself into my responsibilities, cooking more, working harder, sitting beside Daniel at community gatherings, and trying to feel what I used to feel. I prayed longer and with more desperation than I ever had in my life. I thought if I just tried hard enough, the feeling would return, that the version of myself who had made that promise with complete confidence would come back and reclaim her place inside me. But she didn't come back. And one evening, Owen told me quietly that his work on the property was nearly finished and that he would be leaving by the end of the following week. I felt the bottom drop out of my chest. Not because I was in love with him the way people imagine these stories go, but because I realized in that moment that what he represented to me, the possibility of a different kind of life, the experience of being truly known, was about to disappear. And I hadn't made any decision about what I was going to do with what I had discovered about myself. I had been waiting, hoping the decision would somehow make itself, and now time had run out. That night, my mother found me sitting alone in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to sleep. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat down across from me and looked at me with that quiet wisdom she had always carried, and she asked me one thing. She asked me if I was still myself. And I started to cry, and I couldn't stop for a very long time. I had to tell Daniel the truth. I want you to understand how much that cost me. He had done nothing wrong. He was a good man living faithfully and honestly within a life he had always believed in. He didn't deserve any of what I had to say to him, but I had already made one promise I couldn't keep. I refused to build an entire marriage on a second one. I told him that I was not the person I had been when I made that promise to him, that something in me had changed and I didn't fully understand it yet, but I could not, with any honesty, give him the future I had described. I told him he deserved someone who was all the way present, someone whose heart wasn't halfway somewhere else she couldn't even name yet. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had seen something shifting in me for weeks. He said he had been hoping it would resolve itself. He was not cruel. He was heartbroken. And his heartbreak was the hardest thing I have ever had to witness, because I caused it. and I caused it despite having tried so hard not to. The weeks that followed were among the most painful of my life. There were members of our community who were angry. My father was deeply disappointed. I carried the weight of knowing that I had hurt people who loved me and trusted me. I had been the dependable one. And now I had proven that even the dependable ones can reach a point where what they promised is no longer what they can give. But here is what I also learned slowly and painfully, and with a great deal of prayer. Keeping a promise you know to be untrue is not faithfulness. It is a different kind of lie. It is building a life on a foundation that you know has already cracked, and calling that foundation solid because admitting the truth is too hard. Real integrity, I came to understand, is not just about honoring your word. It is about being honest when you discover that your word was spoken before you fully understood yourself. I did not leave my community immediately. That is a longer and separate story. But I began having honest conversations with my mother, with our bishop, with myself about who I was and what kind of life I could genuinely, faithfully, and wholeheartedly give myself to. That process was slow and humbling and full of grief, but it was real. And for the first time in months, I could breathe again. I think about that younger version of me, sometimes the one standing in the field with her whole future arranged neatly in front of her. I don't judge her. She made the most sincere promise she knew how to make. She simply made it before she had met all the parts of herself that were still waiting, and the hardest lesson life ever taught me is this: sometimes the promise you cannot keep is the one that breaks you open into the person you were always meant to become. And facing that truth with honesty and accountability and compassion for everyone involved is the most difficult and most important thing a person can ever do. That is not an excuse for the pain I caused, but it is the truth of what I lived. If you've ever made a promise with completely sincere intentions and then discovered that life changed you in ways you never expected, I would really love to hear from you. Drop your experience in the comments below, because I truly believe these conversations matter and you might be carrying something someone else needs to hear. And if this story touched something in you, please share it with someone who might need the reminder that being honest about who you've become takes more courage than pretending you are still who you used to be. Thank you for listening to all of it. Every painful, beautiful, complicated piece of it.